Today we'll be discussing about convolutional neural networks, but before that we have something pending from last class, which is supervised dimensionality reduction. So we discussed different methods of dimensionality reduction, which means we saw what methods did we see? PCA, we saw k-means clustering, which was another name is vector quantization. And then we saw NMF. What else did we see? Pardon? PLCA. Yeah, PLCA is a kind of non-negative matrix factorization. We saw that one as well. Okay, so we saw this example of PCA where you take the vector x and project it along the direction of maximum variation or maximum variance. And so let us say u is your direction, or basically u is the eigenvector along which the eigenvalue is maximum, and then y is your transformed low dimensional vector. So pictorially it will look something like this. You have data, let us say, distributed in 2 dimension. And if you use PCA, you will take the direction along which variance is maximum and then project it along that dimension, and you get nice one-dimensional representation. But the problem will occur in this case. So the points on one side are some other class, and on the other side of this line are some other. Just a reference. Okay, let us say that the classes are such that they are very close to the boundary. The whole distribution lies very close to the boundary, and so that the direction of maximum variation is not the direction of discrimination, but it's oblique to or orthogonal to that direction, right? So, as in this example. So, what you find here is if you use PCA, it will find the direction along which the variation is maximum, which is unfortunately not the direction which preserves distances or which preserves the discrimination between the classes, and that's why you get everything merged together. Ideally, what would you like to have is if you can get a line along, if you get a dimension, this direction, and project everything along this direction, that will be the best discriminating line. So, for example, if these are the two distributions, and this green line, this line is the one which actually discriminates the data. Okay, in other words, this green line is the line along which you are projecting your data, right? If you project your data along this line, you get this distribution. But if you rotate this line, let us say to this orientation, you find that the data is very well distributed. So basically what you are trying to do is, you are trying to maximize the separation between the two classes, like the inter-cluster or inter-class separation you want to maximize, but also you want to minimize the intra-class variance, which is obvious from this figure, that if you don't maximize the intra-class variance, then you won't get a good separation. Okay, so you want to minimize the inter-class distance and minimize the intra-class variance. Pardon? These bars? These are the histograms. If you project your data, I am telling. So if you project your data on one dimension, so this is the dimension. So if you project your data along this direction or on this dimension, then this is the distribution of the two classes in that one-dimensional space. So these bar plots are the histogram of data after projection, right? Before projection they are separable, after projection they are not separable, because on one dimension they are overlapping, the two distributions are overlapping. But if you turn your orientation in such a way that the intra-class distance is intra-class distance is minimized and the inter-class distance is maximized, then you get nice separation, that the two heaps are exactly separated. Is this figure clear? I'm sorry, I kind of assumed that everybody will understand immediately that this is a histogram of data projected along one dimension. Any questions here? Okay, thank you for your question, Rian. Next, now the question is, okay, how do we find this dimension? How do we find this direction W along which we project to maximize our classification performance? So let us define some certain quantities. The mean of each class is M1 and M2. Like we have two classes, binary classification case. M1 and M2 are the means of data of two classes in the original space, in the two-dimensional space, right? So mean of each class in X is the original space, and Y is the projected space. Let us say now MK, or like without bold M, M1, M2, K is 1 and 2, right here. Okay, let me write it down, I think. K can be, K belongs to 1, 2, right? So this unbold, not bold MK or M1, M2 are the means of two classes after projection. In principle, so what will it become? So if you take M1, if you take Xn becomes W transpose times Xn. So therefore, you can take all the W transpose common and you get Mk is W transpose times bold Mk, right? And so this is the measure of, this is the mean of each class in the projected space. Similarly, what is the variance, intra-class variance in the projected space? It will be Yn minus Mk, so Mk is the kth class, and n are the indices of the points belonging to the kth class. So y minus m whole square summed over all this thing. You can divide by a number of points, but okay, let us ignore that for the time being. So this is the intra-class variance within the same class. So the variance of the kth class, S square is the variance, and for the kth class, right? Is this clear? Okay. So next. Now we want to find a W which maximizes the following cost function or the objective function. The following objective function. What do we want to maximize? We want to maximize M2 minus M1 whole square, which means, okay, you want to maximize the inter-class distance, right? Mk is the mean of this class in the projected space. M2 is the mean of the other class in the projected space. You want to maximize their separation, which means you want to maximize their means, the distance between their means. So M2 minus M1 whole square, that is what you want to maximize. But you also want to minimize the intra-class variance. And what is that? S1 square plus S2 square. Okay, S1 square is the intra-class variance of the first class, S2 square is that for the second class. And you take the sum and you want to maximize their sum. Sorry, minimize their sum. So this is a new cost function or new objective function which you want to maximize. And if you maximize this, you are in principle maximizing your intra-class, maximizing interclass and minimizing the intra-class distances. Okay. Now, once you formulate this, everything else becomes simpler, right? So this was a clever step to be able to formulate what you want in mathematical precise objective function. And now the beauty of this function is that it is also very easy to solve, as you will see in the next step. So you have your objective function, which you can expand in this way. So the square can be written, it can be opened up, it can be written as this into this transpose. Okay. Is this clear? To me it was not clear. Okay, let me tell you why. Because this is not true in general, but in this case M1 and M2 are scalars. That is why this is possible. Otherwise always it would have been W minus W transpose into W minus W, right? Okay, I mean something transpose into something. But here, since these are scalars, so you can write it the other way. This into this transpose, means vector into vector transpose. Okay, so W transpose M2 minus W transpose M1 and into this whole thing transpose divided by, this thing is clear, okay, S1 square, sorry, S1 square plus S2 square. So this is what is the definition of S1 square. Okay, means, so I have taken K as the index. So you are summing over K as well. Okay, I should have written summed over K as well. Right? Okay, so this is what is your objective function. Now you can simplify it, you can take W out. So you get W transpose times some term times W. And what is this sum term? This is basically M2 minus M1 into M2 minus M1 transpose. In the denominator, you again can take out W transpose here out and W here out. So the term which you get, the SW, is this one. Just take a moment to have a look at this. It is very simple. Just I have taken the W's common, right? In both the terms, W's can be taken out as common. So we take the W out, whatever is remaining inside, we write it as a matrix SB, and in the denominator matrix SW. Okay. One point to note here is that the magnitude of W is not important. Why? Because you are finding directions, you are not finding points, right? So what is the equation of a line? The equation of a line is simply W dot x is equal to 0, right? So the magnitude of W is not important, because even if I take twice of W, it's still, the line equation does not change, right? So that is why the magnitude of W is not important. You can take it as whatever you want, and in this derivation it is not considered. The magnitude of W is not considered. Okay. Now, okay, so we have got this J. So if you have a look at this J, you want to maximize it with respect to W. Okay, very popular approach. Take the derivative, put it equal to 0, and then you get maximum. You can get the maximum point. So you took dou J upon dou W. This is a vector. So J is a scalar divided by the vector W, and this is equal to 0. So what will it look like? So, okay, is it difficult to derive this? Okay, so basically what you get in general is derivative of A upon B is something divided by B square, and then B times derivative of A minus A times derivative of B, right? But since you are equating it to 0, the denominator is not important, right? Because you are equating it to 0, denominator is not playing a role in the optimization problem. That's why I've given up the denominator, only the numerator is written. So this part, in the derivative of the other part, which is, okay, the other part was W transpose SWW. The derivative of this will be twice of SWW. It's twice of S times W, right? So 2 is again, I've given it up. So SW times W remains. The next is this thing, the denominator part into the derivative of the numerator, which is W transpose SBW. The derivative will be twice of SBW. So that is what 2 is given up. Okay, SBW. And if you take this to the other side, it becomes something like this. SWW. This is a scalar. So in this derivation, scalars are not important because, okay, you can take it there at in the denominator, but it will not play a role here. Okay, I will tell you why. Next is, okay, now you expand SW. So, sorry, this you expand SB. Your SB is basically, if you go back here, M2 minus M1 times M2 minus M1 transpose. So M2 minus M1 into M2 minus M1 transpose times W, and you have the scalar terms like W transpose SW. This is one scalar term divided by SW SPW, another scalar term. So that is there, but okay, assume that it is there somewhere here. Into some scalar. Okay. Now let us look at this thing. So if I multiply M2 minus M1 transpose into W, this will again become a scalar, right? This product will be a scalar. So this means that this whole scalar is some function of W. But I do not want any scalars because I'm only interested in directions. So from here I can easily see SW times W should be equal to M2 minus M1 vector times some scalar which is a function of W, but that does not matter because I can normalize the whole thing, I can ignore the whole thing. So ultimately it becomes M2 minus M1, and then you take this as W inverse there, and that is what you get. So just again we see what is SW inverse. SW inverse was the covariance matrix of in the original space, in the X space. So this is my new W. So basically it's the covariance matrix inverse times m2 minus m1 into whatever scalars you want, but they don't play any role. You can also normalize it and say this is my w. This method is popularly called Fisher's linear discriminant method. Basically, it is trying to discriminate between the two classes, assuming that they are linearly separable. If they are not linearly separable, then it won't do any good to you, right? If two classes are not linearly separable in higher dimension, you cannot expect that they will become linearly separable if you project them to lower dimension. Maybe I'm not right, but okay. There are cases in which they can be linearly separable, but okay, let us ignore that. Okay, I'm not sure. I have to check that. Okay, fine. If they are not linearly separable in the higher dimension, then you cannot make a linear projection to another space, a lower dimensional space, where you can expect them to be linearly separable. That won't happen. So linear discriminant analysis. Okay. With this, we can move on to the next today's topic, which is CNNs. Okay, some announcements. We have theory quiz on Thursday or Friday. Some people, they have things to do on other days, so we can shift the quiz to Thursday and Friday, but unfortunately we have very less time left, so we have to have a coding test also very soon, so they are kind of back to back, means there is a gap of just 2-3 days. Is that alright? Okay. It shouldn't be a problem because earlier we were planning to take the theory quiz on this week basically, Friday or Saturday, but since you need more time, so you are given extra time, but then the coding quiz remains the same. Fine? Okay. Let us move on to next topic. We have been discussing about dimensionality reduction in our past so many lectures. Let us dive a bit deeper into it. Why are we so much concerned about dimensionality reduction? So let us try to appreciate the scale of this problem of large dimensionality. A good reference can be PRML section 1.4, which they dedicate about 2 pages to this, to explain different aspects of the curse of dimensionality. If there is more dimensionality, it becomes difficult. We have discussed some things like, okay, if it is the number of dimensions is more, then you need more. Let's say if you're using neural network or some classifier or some machine learning model, it will have more number of parameters, right? To train that, you need more data. Like so many things that like kind of cascade, and then you will need more processing power because you have to do so many computations. You need more processing power. So your device, you cannot run it on small devices. The machine learning model cannot be run on small devices like mobiles or something, right? So with large dimensions, there are many problems. That is why we do dimensionality reduction, so that the search space of our machine learning algorithm is simpler, or is smaller search space. It can efficiently and effectively find good separators or good parameter values. Okay, so this is one example which is discussed in Bishop's book, PRML book. So I have changed the colors just because some people they can't distinguish green and red. So I have made it blue and pink and dark blue. So these are 3 classes. One is this sea green or sea blue color. This is the pink, and this is dark blue. These are 3 classes, and they are in a higher dimension. Let's say 20 dimensions. But if we take only 2 dimensions, x6 and x7, in this space it is not very well separable. In the higher dimensions, yes, it was like perfectly separable, but in this we have projected down to just a few dimensions. It is not very well separable. But this is just to illustrate that, okay, if you have what is the advantage of working with this smaller space? That you can easily make your classifiers, easily make your models in this smaller search space. So for example, the example which they have considered here is, you divide the whole space into blocks, right? In this case, 16 blocks of 4 by 4, right? You divided the whole space uniformly into cells or blocks, and each cell was assigned one label. Okay, the top 4 cells are always navy blue, and these cells are pink, and these cells are always turquoise or sea green. So, but if you want to do this same method for let's say 3 dimensions now, number of cells will become how many? So if this is your number of, this is the dimension D, and this is the number of cells, which is 4 to the power D. So if your D is 2, you have 16 cells. This is number of cells. If you have 3, it becomes 64, and you can see it is increasing exponentially, right? If you have 20 dimensions, then number of cells is very, very large. So that is the curse of dimensionality. By increasing the number of dimensions, your problem is becoming exponentially harder in this sense. Okay, to appreciate it better, so let us take a real life example. So if you want to do image classification, what is the dimensionality here? Dimensionality here will be maybe 1000 cross 200 image. Let us say all images are of same size. 1000 cross 200 image, which means 1000, 2 into 10 to the power 5, like 2 lakhs is the size of one data vector. So this is huge. Yeah, number of pixels. Huh? Times 3, very good. Yes, times 3. So 6 lakh. 6 lakh is the length size of my single vector. So you can imagine that the dimensionality is a huge problem. How many, even if I make a linear classifier, how many parameters do I need in my model? At least 6 lakhs, right? If you 6 lakhs plus 1, if you want to make a linear classifier, just a single linear classifier. And what to speak of, it is very much possible that single linear classifier is not able to handle this, is not able to classify this data, right? So you may have to go for higher dimensions. Means more complicated models. Okay, so this is difficult problems. You can see the curse of dimensionality is there in our many real life problems. That is why it is important to have means to handle this problem efficiently. How do we handle this problem in general? So if you have studied a little bit about image processing or image classification, you will immediately remember that, okay, the conventional methods are that we can find blobs or regions that are likely to classify the image. For example, this image, you know, this person has mustache, very typical mustache, which is almost similar in all the images, right? So you can take this as one template, and now how do you find this mustache in any given image? If I give you a small template of a mustache and I ask you, let us say in the first image, where is that same mustache? How will you do that? Cross correlation. In cross correlation, what you will do, you will take the template and first match it over this window, then move the window a little, match it over this new window, then move the window a bit more, and in this way scan the whole area. Scan the whole image with your template, and wherever you get the maximum cross correlation, there you will say it is my maximum. The mustache is, most probably it is there. There are false alarms also, means you can find maxima even when there is no mustache. Okay, but ignoring those cases, you can find likely regions of mustache. Similarly, you can find other blobs. Let's say the turban, a very peculiar turban this person wears, and similarly, let's say a hand holding a stick, which is there in at least 2 of the images I could get, this one and this one, almost similar. In this one is little different configuration of the stick. Okay. So these are all manually done, and you know manually is not very efficient. We can find optimal solutions. But the idea is clear that cross correlation of these templates with the test image will give a matching score. And if you concatenate all these or combine all these matching scores, you can kind of formulate a handmade rule, okay, whenever the score is above this threshold, then most likely it is Chata Chaudhary, right? Now, can we do it better? Can we find optimal templates? Not handmade templates, but can I find some optimal templates which can give better performance, right? And it will also save experts' efforts, right? We can find these templates optimally from the data by designing models, by training discriminatively. What is the meaning of discriminatively? Anybody remembers from the last class? Pardon? You? Train over only one class of samples. That is discriminative. Anybody else? Pardon? Yes. So discriminative means you are training from both the classes that I want to kind of reproduce or kind of maximize my performance for the, not performance. Let's say I want to maximize my score for these classes, but minimize my score for these classes. So I have to discriminate between the two classes. That's why I need both the information of both, or as many classes are there, all I need to see. So discriminatively, in simpler sense, it means you want to find the boundaries. On the contrast, what is the other category or other kind of training? Generative. In generative, you only want to regenerate one particular class. That is why you do not need information about other classes. As long as you are able to generate one class, you are happy that this is a good model. Discriminatively, okay, so generative is kind of trying to find the distribution of the whole data of one class. Discriminative is trying to find boundaries between different classes so that it can discriminate very well. So this is an intuitive understanding which you should keep in mind. Okay, now recall cross correlation. You have already seen that cross correlation. If cross correlation is more, then you can say, okay, this template is present there. So let us say X is my original image, W is my window or the template, W is the template, and H is the cross correlation between the two, right? Okay. 2D convolution, okay. Why am I calling it convolution? Because others call it so. I have no intention in calling it as convolution. It is actually cross correlation, but people call it convolution, so let us stick with that terminology. So you do cross correlation. This is a mathematical formula which I just wrote while preparing this lecture. I do not know, there can be some errors here, but to me, as of now, it looks all right. So this is a simple thing. Yeah, you are scanning over the entire image using this W kernel. So I call it as kernel. Kernel means your template. Is it clear? Kernel is your template. And you are scanning over the entire window. So this is, when you scan it over, you get I1 and J1, means Hi1, J1. This is another 2D matrix which you obtain as a scores of matching the window with the image. In this notation, S is my hop size. Generally, when you take cross correlation, you take the hop size to be 1. You move by one unit or 1 pixel. But in this case, you are moving by multiple pixels to save time, right? You don't want to waste time on, let us say if I have 10 cross 10 kernel and I am scanning 100 cross 100 image, I can, means very little information is there in adjoining pixels. I know it is highly correlated image, right? Correlation across space. That is why I can take longer strides. Okay. Now, S is the hop size or the stride size. K is my kernel size or the template size. And Hi1, J1 will be maximum whenever match occurs. But in this case, my W is not handmade, it is automatically learned. How it is automatically learned? So this is our unknown parameters which we want to optimize. Okay. So let us first, okay, we will discuss about the training part a little later, but first let us try to understand this operation, this convolution operation or the cross correlation operation. So let us say this is my image, this is my kernel. Okay, if I use a hop size of 1, let us say hop size of 1, what will be the output? Can anybody suggest? What is the output here? Okay, what is the size of the output first of all? What is the output size? Those of you who know the answer, please raise your hand. Okay. Huh? Pardon? Okay. Hop size is 1. Pardon? Padding? No padding. 3 cross 3. Very good. So basically, where is my pen? Yeah. So you multiply this matrix. Okay, let me draw. So you multiply your kernel with the first window and you sum over all the product. So you get, what do you get? 3. In the next shot, you take this window and you multiply. What do you get? What do you get? 0. I also got 0. Then you have this window. You multiply your kernel. What do you get? 3. In this way, you move your kernel then. Let us take blue color. You go one step down. Take this window. What is your value now? 1. Let's take some other color. The next thing is this. What do you get now? 2. And similarly, the next one will be 0. Next one will be 3, 2, 2. Okay. This is convolution. Oh, sorry. This is cross correlation. Oh, well, let us call it as convolution. So this is convolution. Now if I use a hop size of 2, what do I get? So this is with hop size 1. With hop size 2, what do I get? What is the output size? 2 cross 2, very good. Then what is the output? 3, 3, 3, 2. Basically you take this first window, then do not take the second window, take the third window, and that is how you get it. Is it clear? This is called convolution. You have already done it, I think, in an assignment, right? Okay. So, okay, this is just a question that if you are given, this is everything in general terms now. If an image size I cross j and kernel size k cross l with a hop size of s and s dash along 2 dimensions, basically in this direction it is s, in this direction it is s dash. What is the size of the output without any zero padding? And what is the size of the output when a zero padding of width p along each border is used? Which means you make like like a row of p zeros, or means p rows of zeros on each border. Okay. Which means, let us say, if you have this as your original matrix, and my p is equal to 2, which means I will get 0, 0, 0, 0 here, 0, 0, 0, 0 here, basically. And similarly here also 0, 0. And here again 0, 0. So this width is 2. This is P and this is also P. Right? This is called zero padding, and these are just some notations P for zero padding. Okay. Okay, you can answer this question on your own, right? You have done it for the assignment, so I'm sure you can do it. But here we have a hop size as well. So keep in mind the hop size. In one of the summer schools which we did in the summers, I asked this question. People came up with a formula. I tried different values of I, J, K, L, S, S dash. The formula gave perfect answer, but the formula was wrong. The people were so clever, they could come up with a formula which is wrong, but still it fits their minimal data. The minimum, whatever data we took, it fits that. But the answer was wrong because it doesn't generalize over all the data. But yeah, people can construct equations like that. Okay, now the question comes, okay, now you understood the convolution part. How do we optimize our kernels for classification? So the answer is, you define multiple kernels. So we just took an example of single kernel. You can have multiple kernels, right? Which is like multiple templates, right? And then you find H for each kernel. What is H? H is the W convolved with X or X convolved with W. That is your output H. And so find H for each kernel. Now use this H as input to your neural network classifier, which you have already seen. Take a simple feed-forward neural network with no hidden layer also is fine, or like one hidden layer. And then finally the output layer, which is your classification layer. If you are doing multi-class classification, take it as a multi-class classification layer, which means what kind of nonlinearity? Softmax nonlinearity. And what kind of activation? Oh, sorry. What kind of objective function or loss function? Categorical cross entropy, right? And that will give me a network. Now I can train my model, but not just from input to output, but from not just from H to output, but from X to output, right? Because this operation H is equal to X convolved with W, this is also differentiable. So I can include it as a layer and I can optimize end to end. Basically, which means when I'm taking derivative of my weights, I can also differentiate the objective function with respect to this W, right? Because this is also my differentiable parameters. So I can optimize my objective function with respect to the layers of the DNN or the neural network, as well as the W's here. Okay. So just quick visualization of this whole thing. So you have your input X here, you convolve it with a W, you get H. Now you take another kernel, another W dash or W2, convolve your X with W2 and you get another H dash. Then take W dash 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 and you get H dash dash dash. In this way, you can take any number of kernels you want. Then what do? You take all these outputs, put them in a vector. So this whole output you can put it as a vector, right? You can just convert the whole tensor into single vector, right? Flatten it, and then you give it as input to your neural network. Let us say it has single hidden layer and then followed by output layer, and then you optimize your network end to end, basically, which means this is your output and this is your input, and optimize with respect to all the weights, these kernel weights as well as this hidden layer weights, and that's it, you get it. Okay, so is it clear? This is the whole sum and substance of the popular convolutional neural networks.
Why are you taking multiple kernels?
You can take single kernel, but then what single kernel, what single template will learn? It will learn only single, either mustache or the turban or the stick. But you want to learn many features from the image. Maybe not just the mustache, not just the stick, not just the turban, but also maybe glasses, maybe coat, or maybe hands, or
Somewhat according to what we are thinking, this hidden layer does. Like a single template, a single kernel might.
no, how will it learn? Single template can learn only single local region, no? A single kernel or a single template will learn single feature, no? Either a mustache or nostril or eyes or ears, something. I'm not deciding. The model is deciding. The data is driving the whole learning, right? That is why I said this is optimal solution. If your optimizer is able to find the best solution, then it is better than handmade. Okay. Is it clear?
So the number of kernels I take is also higher.
Yes. Good point. The number of kernels is a hyperparameter. Yeah, that is true. Since this is, I told you in the beginning that these can take positive and negative values, and your pixels are never negative. So definitely it is not interpretable. For interpretable, you have to go to non-negative kernels or something of that sort to have interpretability. People, they do use some notion of interpretability. How they, but at best what they can say is, okay, this kernel is able to learn edges or circles, like simplistic shapes, but it is not much there. That level of interpretability is not there. The one which we got with NMF. Yeah.
So here in CNF, you just use the convolution part for identifying the input here for neural net, right? So can we do it repetitively?
Just wait, it's coming. It's on the way. Okay. So now how do we deal with RGB images? They have a 2D convolution might not work, it appears, because it has got 3 dimensions, I cross j cross 3, right? But what we observe is that the 3 channels are correlated. So no point in convolving over the 3rd dimension. So what we do is we take a kernel of shape k cross 3. Is it clear? It is not clear. So basically, when you have an image which is this, 3 channels, and these channels are always highly correlated, right? Generally they are correlated because they correspond to the color, right? And colors are mostly highly correlated, even if they are not always invariant, but they are highly correlated. Then if you convolve it with a W, which is also 3 dimension, and you just scan it along this direction and this direction, not along the backward direction. So let us take an example. Let us say this is 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. Okay. Let me draw it separately. Let us say this is 0, 0, 0, 1, so on. This is the first image. The second image is 1, 0, 1, 1. And the third image is 1, 2, 3, 4. And my kernel is 1, 0, 0, 1. And then 0, 0, 0, 1, and then 1, 1, 1, 1. What will be the output? What is the output here? How will you do it? Oh, you multiply the whole block. So pairwise multiplication. So 1 into 0, 0 into 0, 0 into 0, 1 into 1. And then at the back 0 into 1, multiply all these terms and sum them up. You get a single number. So let us see what you get. You get 1 plus 1, this is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. How much is this? 7 plus 10 plus, what is this? 1, 0, 0, 1, it's 1, right? Plus, what is this? This is again 1. So you get here is 12. And then when you scan, you will move this kernel to whatever is here, right? You move it to the right and then to the bottom. But you do not move in the depth direction because your kernel size and image size, they are same. And you're not convolving along the depth dimension. Okay. Pardon?
How are you saying that they are highly correlated?
What is RGB? RGB refers to one color value, right?
Yeah, but they can have
They can have different values,
So
but
particular kernel, let's say one has a high value, one has a low value. So how
there is no. I'm not detecting colors here. I'm detecting Sarah Chaudhary. The red turban, it's red. So they are always correlated. No, there can be slight variation that can be orange or dark red, light red, but it won't become green suddenly. So that is why correlated. Okay, we can stack layers of kernels. Oh, the point which you mentioned, and then we can have means not just okay. We in one layer we have multiple kernels, and then we can have multiple layers of kernels, right? Just like we do in deep neural networks. We don't just consider single hidden layer. We can have multiple hidden layers. The output of one hidden layer becomes the input to the next hidden layer, and the whole data trickles down through this stacks of layers, or this layers of um, layers of neurons. Similarly, you can have layers of kernels. So let us say I have my image. This is a 2x2. Sorry, this is a two-dimensional image, and I do convolution. I convolve with 5 kernels of shape 3x3. Right? What will I get? From each kernel, I will get a single matrix, isn't it? From each kernel, I will get a single matrix. So in this way, I get 5 matrices, which I have stacked like this. Now I can feed this into another layer of kernels. After nonlinearity, of course, I can have sigmoid nonlinearity or rectified linear unit nonlinearity. Most popular is rectified linear unit nonlinearity for the reasons we have discussed. What is the reason? Trains faster because yes, the gradients don't die out, right? Because your sigmoid thing has got long plateau, so your gradients are very small there, so you cannot train very fast. But ReLU has just slope, so it trains very fast. And also it is very quick to implement. You don't have to take log or anything, just if it is negative, make it 0. If it is positive, leave it as it is. So it is very fast in implementation also. That is why we use ReLU. It's popular practice. Okay, so you used 5 kernels. You got this something n cross m cross 5, and then you are using, let us say, 4 kernels, and the shape of each kernel is 3 cross 3 cross 5. Why 5? Because we are assuming that these are correlated, and the depth is we are not convolving along the depth. So each kernel is of shape 3 cross 3 cross 5. I need not write 5 here, because if I know my input is of depth 5, this kernel has to be of depth 5, right? So generally people don't write cross 5, they just say 4 kernels of shape 3 cross 3. It is understood that it is of depth 5 because the input is of depth 5. Okay, and then finally we get something I cross j cross 4, because I have 4 kernels, each kernel will give me 1 layer or 1 matrix. So this is known as convolutional neural network, because with many layers. It is also called ConvNet, it is also called CNN, it is called by different names like this. Okay, so for CNNs, I am not going through the detailed theory, but I gave a couple of lectures last semester for another course. These lectures are available online on YouTube. You can watch these lectures and you can learn about these topics. It's not very difficult, they're very obvious, and what we have discussed is sufficient. It's just jargons. You can learn about pooling. I think we have discussed about pooling, that even if we have not discussed, no problem, just go through the lecture. It is a very simple thing. You have, let us say, got 5 numbers, you want to pool it and get single number, you can either average them out or take the max, right? Based on that, it will become either average pooling or max pooling. So pooling just means you reduce multiple numbers into a single number. Either take average or max or min, whatever you want, or that is called pooling. Then dropouts, you already know. Then flattening, we already discussed. You have a tensor, you convert it into a single vector, that is flattening. And number of parameters in each layer you can compute very easily. Computational complexity, which means basically how many multiplications are involved, because when kernel will multiply, so many multiplications will be required. Like cross correlation is a very costly operation, right? Multiply with each and every, like scanning over the whole area, by moving little by little. So it's a costly operation. So computational complexity of each layer plays an important role in CNNs. CNNs are generally very slow. Slow means computationally very expensive as compared to DNNs and other models, because they are processing the same input multiple times, because scanning and with lots of overlap. Okay, and the problem of vanishing gradients we have already discussed, but in these videos you will see some more discussion, so you can do that. Standard practices, generally we use odd sized kernels, 3, 5, 7, like that. And we use padding. Generally padding is used whenever you want your output size to be the same as input size. And ReLU activation we have discussed already. That is it. Thank you.